Hours later, YN finally drifted back to consciousness as the anesthesia wore off. She remained dazed, her eyes glazed over as she stared blankly at Mrs. Choi, Jihoon, and Jungkook. The doctor tried to speak with her several times, but YN only responded with a faint, slow nod. Sensing she needed a moment, the doctor instructed her family and Jungkook to step outside, giving YN the space she needed to clear her head. After nearly 2 hours, the fog finally lifted. She began to remember everything, and her speech returned to normal. Mrs. Choi, how are you feeling, sweetheart? Is anything hurting? YN shook her head weakly. I'm okay, Mom. Just a dull ache in a few places. When did you and Jihoon get here? Mrs. Choi, early this morning, darling. She took her daughter's hand, stroking it tenderly. In's gaze shifted to Jungkook. She was desperate to ask about Taehyung's whereabouts, as she hadn't seen him since she woke up. Dark thoughts began to cloud her mind. She was terrified that her mother and brother had driven him away. YN. Young. Jungkook, sensing her panic immediately, spoke up. Taehyung is still at the funeral home. Tayo is being looked after by my mother. In's brow furrowed in confusion. The funeral home. Jungkook hesitated for a moment before finally speaking. Kim's aunt, she's passed away. In's eyes flew open in shock. Passed away. What happened? Why so suddenly? Jungkook. Yojin, that woman murdered Kim's aunt. And she's the one who ran you down yesterday using the aunt's car. YN fell into a stunned, horrified silence. Suddenly, she tried to climb out of the hospital bed, but Mrs. Choi quickly held her back. Mrs. Choi, don't move, YN. You just had surgery. Your wounds are still fresh. YN, I have to see Taehyung, Mom. He must be falling apart, she said, her voice trembling. Jungkook, you can't move yet, YN. Don't worry, Seokjin Hung is with him. He's not alone. YN closed her eyes as the tears finally began to fall. Mrs. Choi, YN, why didn't you tell me you were working at Taehyung's house? YN looked at her mother, her gaze weary. If I had, you would have been furious and dragged me back to Busan. Mom, at first, I only did it because I was desperate. We needed the money for Jihoon's school and our living expenses. The salary Taehyung offered was too high to turn down. So, I buried my past and took the job as a nanny just to get us by. YN, but Mom, I've learned so much since then. Facts that changed everything. I chose to forgive him. I knew you and Jihoon wouldn't understand, which is why we were planning to go to Busan yesterday to talk to you in person. But the accident, it changed everything. YN, Mom, I know you're disappointed, but Taehyung isn't the villain here. He's a victim, and he's the one who has suffered the most. He lost his father years ago, and now he's lost his mother to the same nightmare, she sobbed. Mrs. Choi and Jihoon could only watch her in silence. YN, Mom, I'm sorry, but I want to start over with Taehyung. Mom, Mrs. Choi, let's focus on your recovery first, and on Taehyung's mental healing. After that, we can talk about the two of you. As your mother, I only want what's best for you. I'm happy if you're happy, but I can't give you my blessing just like that. I need to talk to him first and see if he is truly sincere. Jungkook, don't worry, ma'am, my cousin is a good man, and he will make YN happy. I only hope you won't make the road ahead any harder for them. Mrs. Choi remained silent, her face clouded with a somber expression. VRRR, 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 the sound of Jungkook's phone ringing. Jungkook quickly reached for his phone and answered the call. Jungkook, Hung. Seokjin, get to the funeral. Home now. Taehyung and I are heading to the station. The police just called, they've caught Yojin. She's in custody. Jungkook's eyes widened. Alright, I'm on my way, he said, before hanging up. YN, what is it, Jungkook? Jungkook, I have to go and cover for Taehyung Hung at the funeral home. He and Seokjin Hung are going to the police station. They've caught Yojin. YN nodded, her tears continuing to flow. Jungkook said his goodbyes and hurried out. Mrs. Choi stroked In's hair, trying to soothe her as the sobs became more violent. YN, if only that woman had never entered his life, Taehyung wouldn't be in this much pain, she whispered. Mrs. Choi, listen to me, darling. People who destroy lives might feel like they've won today. But they forget that every tear shed because of their cruelty is a debt that the universe will eventually collect, with an interest they will never be able to afford. Mrs. Choi, the agony Taehyung is feeling right now, one day, it will turn into a far more bitter punishment for those who started this. YN remained silent, her tears falling like rain. Meanwhile, after Jungkook arrived at the funeral home, Taehyung and Seokjin rushed toward the police station. Upon arrival, they were led to the interrogation room. Through the glass, they saw Yojin sitting calmly, staring blankly at the detective. As she turned toward the door, her expression suddenly shifted, her eyes grew soulful, locking onto Taehyung with a gaze thick with toxic obsession. Yojin. Taehyung ah. Taehyung's hands curled into fists, his eyes igniting with pure, unadulterated rage. He lunged at her, raining blows down upon her. If Seokjin and the officers hadn't intervened and physically pulled him back, he likely would have killed her right there. Seokjin. Taehyung, get a grip. You're only going to ruin your life by taking the law into your own hands. Taehyung, if I wasn't thinking about my child and YN, I would kill you right now, and I wouldn't give a damn if I spent the rest of my life behind bars. He spat, his voice trembling with fury. Yojin looked up at him, her face flushed and eyes shimmering with tears. Her jaw tightened as she tasted the blood from the beating administered by the man she claimed to love. Taehyung, if not for the people I love, I'd make sure you died a far more agonizing death than my mother did. Yojin bowed her head, then let out a chilling, hollow laugh. Yojin, your mother wouldn't have ended up that way if she'd just listened to me. But the old hag was stubborn. I gave her everything, and she owed me her obedience. She brought this on herself for defying me, she cackled, her voice dripping with malice. Yojin had murdered Kim's mother with sadistic cruelty, ignoring every plea for mercy, mercilessly beating and berating the defenseless woman until the end. Yojin, if you had just accepted me, you wouldn't have lost your father and mother so soon. You're the reason they died, Taehyung, she said, looking at him with a vacant, chilling smile. Taehyung snapped. He shoved Seokjin and the police officers aside with superhuman strength, throwing himself at Yojin again. His rage was so blinding that even the officers struggled to restrain him. Yojin's face was now a map of bruises, blood trickled from her split lip and temple. Her body shook uncontrollably, fueled by the collision of physical agony and heartbreak. Yojin, stop it, she screamed. Yojin, I did all of this because I love you, you idiot. You should be grateful that a woman like me loves you, instead of acting so self-righteous. She shrieked, descending into madness. Taehyung, grateful. Being loved by a monster like you is a curse. You're insane, you're absolutely disturbed. He roared back. The officers quickly dragged Taehyung out of the room. Police officer, sir, I understand your pain. But you must control yourself. If you can't, you'll be the one facing charges. I have to remind you that if you kill the suspect, you'll be facing severe legal consequences. Police officer, please, leave this to the law. We'll ensure she gets the maximum sentence possible. Please, just keep your composure. Seokjin, he's right, Taehyung. Don't let that woman destroy your life. Calm down. She's going to get what's coming to her, either life imprisonment or the death penalty. Her family won't be able to save her. If they try to interfere, they'll face public backlash and their company will collapse. Seokjin, Mr. Yoon values his reputation too much to let his company crumble. This case has gone viral. If the authorities don't act fairly, the public will be in an uproar. The police won't risk their reputation. She's going down, Taehyung. Taehyung went silent, his expression finally softening, though hot tears continued to stream down his face. Seokjin pulled him into a firm embrace, rubbing his back soothingly. Seokjin, Taehyung justice will be served. Taehyung said nothing, his body racking with quiet, desolate sobs. Once Taehyung regained some composure, Seokjin arranged for a car to take him back to the funeral home, while Seokjin stayed at the station to meet the high-profile attorney Taehyung had retained. All the evidence was meticulously organized. The lawyer they had hired was a veteran, known for his clinical precision and relentless pursuit of justice. Yeojin, however, wasn't going down without a fight. She demanded her family hire her own legal team, despite the mountain of evidence against her. Prison infirmary. Yeojin was being treated by a doctor, who gingerly cleaned the wounds on her face. She was held there for a few hours before being transferred to a holding cell. Click. The sound of the door opening. Mrs. Yoon. Yeojin, she called out softly. Her mother rushed to her side, clutching Yeojin's hands. Yeojin turned to look at her mother, her eyes completely vacant. Yeojin, did you hire the lawyers? She asked in a flat, monotone voice. Mr. Yoon, what's the point? The evidence is overwhelming. You aren't getting out of this. Mrs. Yoon, so you're just going to let our daughter rot in prison? She snapped, horrified. Mr. Yoon, and what do you want? For us to be targets of public rage and go bankrupt? Is that it? He glared at his wife. Yeojin tore her gaze away from them, staring at the ceiling with an empty, haunting expression, her hand clenching into a tight fist. Yeojin, do whatever it takes to get me out. If you don't, you'll end up just like that pathetic old woman, she said, completely emotionless. Her parents recoiled, stunned by the sheer darkness in their daughter's voice. Mr. Yoon, you're threatening your own parents. Yeojin, you know how I get. I don't like being told no. Mr. Yoon's face darkened, veins bulging in his neck. He turned toward his wife, his patience finally snapping. Mr. Yoon, this is what you get for spoiling her. You spent all your time at home with her, yet you failed to teach her anything decent. Mrs. Yoon, oh, now you're blaming me. You were never around to raise her. All you did was throw money at her, never caring about your own daughter. Mr. Yoon, if I wasn't out there working, you wouldn't even have the wealth you enjoy today. You only married me for the money anyway, so you should have at least known how to discipline your child. He shouted. The shouting match escalated until Yeojin suddenly snapped. She lunged at her parents, hurling everything she could reach, trays, medical supplies, anything within arm's reach, at them. Mr. Yoon suffered several cuts and bruises as the object struck him. The guards rushed in, subduing Yeojin and dragging her parents out of the room. Mr. Yoon, that girl is a curse. I'm not spending another penny to get her out. I'd rather lose a daughter like that than die at her hands, he said coldly, turning his back on his weeping wife and walking away. Meanwhile, Taehyung had just arrived at the funeral home. His steps were heavy and unsteady as he walked toward the memorial hall. The atmosphere remained somber but busy, mourners continued to arrive to pay their last respects. Taehyung took a shallow breath before stepping inside. However, as his eyes swept the room, he froze in his tracks. He was stunned to see Mrs. Choi and Jihoon standing there, not far from the altar, talking with Jungkook. His gaze remained locked on them for a long moment. He had never expected In's mother and brother to come and pay their respects to his late mother. Taehyung had no idea they were even in Seoul. Jungkook hadn't had the chance to tell him yet. Jungkook, Hung, he said, walking over to meet him. Jungkook glanced briefly at Mrs. Choi and Jihoon before looking back at Taehyung. Jungkook, They arrived in Seoul this morning. YN insisted they come here. She wanted to come herself, but we stopped her. She's still recovering from surgery and shouldn't be moving around yet. Taehyung remained silent for a beat. He took a deep breath to steady himself before approaching Mrs. Choi and Jihoon. Taehyung, Iomioni, it's been a long time, he said, bowing deeply in respect. Mrs. Choi remained silent, her eyes tracing Taehyung's disheveled and exhausted appearance. As a mother who had weathered many storms herself, she couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow seeing him in such a broken state. Mrs. Choi, yes, it has been a long time. Taehyung, I want to apologize for everything that happened in the past. I never intended to hurt YN. I loved her deeply, but the chaos and the pressure I was under back then, it forced my hand. I felt I had no choice but to leave her. Taehyung, Iomioni, I also want to apologize on behalf of my mother. She caused YN so much pain, and she hurt your family deeply. Taehyung slowly sank to his knees, kneeling before Mrs. Choi. I know what she did might be unforgivable. I'm not asking you to forgive her for my sake, but as her son, I felt I had to offer this apology. Mrs. Choi sighed softly before reaching down to guide Taehyung back to his feet. Mrs. Choi, I've heard everything from YN. We are truly sorry for your loss. I hope you can find the strength to get through this. Taehyung nodded, a weary smile touching his lips as his eyes grew red with fresh tears. Jihoon, however, remained silent, his expression unreadable. Though he felt a flicker of pity for Taehyung, he wasn't ready to forgive the man who had caused his sister so much heartache. Taehyung, Iomioni, thank you for coming. Mrs. Choi, YN was the one who asked. She's worried sick about you. You should rest after this, or go see her at the hospital. You look pale. Taehyung nodded weakly. He caught Jihoon's eye, but the younger man quickly looked away, refusing to meet his gaze. Taehyung knew that while Mrs. Choi had softened, winning Jihoon over would be a long, difficult road. Taehyung. Jihoon ah. Taehyung called out softly. Jihoon turned slightly, his gaze cold. I'm only here for Nuna. Don't think for a second that I've forgotten the past. Don't think everything is settled just because we showed up today. Taehyung, I know, I don't expect forgiveness so soon. But I promise you, once this is all over, I will prove that I can protect your sister. Jihoon, then prove it. Stop talking and just do it. Taehyung fell silent, acknowledging that Jihoon had every right to feel that way. He then turned to Jungkook. Taehyung, Jungkook, please take Iomioni and Jihoon back to the hospital or to their lodging. I'll stay here a while longer. Jungkook, copy that, Hung. Iomanam, Jihoon, let's go. I'll drive you. After they left, Taehyung collapsed into a chair, his strength failing. He stared at the photograph of his mother smiling on the altar. There was a sense of relief that Yojin had been caught, but there was a massive void in his heart that would never truly close. Taehyung, he whispered under his breath, Mom, do you see? Even after everything you did to them, they still came to say goodbye. You should have seen how kind the woman you hated truly was. The hospital. YN was lost in her own thoughts when the sound of her hospital door opening startled her. She looked up and saw Taehyung standing there. YN. Oppa. Taehyung managed a small, tired smile. He hurried to her side and took her hand in his, pressing his lips to her knuckles and showering her cheeks with soft kisses. Taehyung, I'm sorry it took me so long to get here. YN shook her head weakly, her eyes brimming with tears. No, I understand. Oppa, I'm so sorry for your loss. You have to be strong. A tear escaped Taehyung's eye as he nodded, kissing her hand again. I know, sweetheart. You and Tayo are my only sources of strength now. Please, don't ever leave me. YN, nodding, I'll always be by your side, Oppa. Taehyung, thank you, darling. YN paused for a moment before speaking again. Did you see my mother and Jihoon? Taehyung, yes, I met them at the funeral home. YN, Jihoon didn't say anything cruel to you, did he? Taehyung shook his head with a faint smile. Your brother is wiser than you think. He knew the timing was wrong. He wasn't going to berate me while I was mourning. He just told me that I have to prove I'm truly good for you. YN nodded with a bittersweet smile. You can do it. You'll win them over. Taehyung simply nodded, a small sense of peace finally washing over him. Despite the crushing grief, talking to YN settled his soul. With her gentle comfort, Taehyung was finally able to fall into a deep, peaceful sleep that night. A week passed, marked by a heavy, stifling atmosphere. Inside the hospital room, which was still dominated by the sharp scent of antiseptics, Taehyung stood before a full-body mirror in the corner. He wore a crisp white shirt that sat in stark contrast to the dark circles of exhaustion etched beneath his eyes. His fingers moved slowly, methodically buttoning his collar. On the bed, YN sat propped up against a stack of pillows. Though bandages were still wrapped around her head, her clear gaze followed Taehyung's every move. YN, are you sure I can't come with you? Taehyung turned, approaching her before sitting on the edge of the bed. You can't, sweetheart. The doctor won't clear you to leave the hospital yet. Your wounds are still fresh, you know a major surgery doesn't just heal in a week. YN, I just wanted to be there for you, she whispered softly. Taehyung, there's no need, love. Jungkook and Seokjin will be by my side at the trial, and other family members will be there too. Don't worry, I'll be fine. Taehyung, I'll call your mother to come and keep you company. YN, no need, Jihoon is coming. Mom said she wanted to stay with Tayo. Taehyung offered a small, weary smile. Over the past week, even though Mrs. Choi hadn't given them her full blessing, she had clearly begun to soften toward Tayo. She couldn't hide how much she adored the little boy. Every time she looked at Tayo, her expression would melt, as if she wanted nothing more than to spend every waking moment with him. At Taehyung's request, Mrs. Choi and Jihoon had spent the last few days staying at his residence. Jihoon had initially refused, but YN had pleaded with them until they agreed. She felt more at ease knowing her mother and brother were behind the gates of Taehyung's estate, protected by a security detail. Taehyung, meanwhile, had spent almost every night at the hospital. He only returned home occasionally to check on Tayo and ensure that Mrs. Choi and Jihoon had everything they needed. Taehyung, alright then, I'm heading out. I'll come straight back once the sentencing is over. YN simply nodded, offering him a supportive smile. Taehyung leaned in, showering In's cheeks with kisses. Then, he straightened up and headed for his car. Today was the day, he had to be at the courthouse for Yeojin's first sentencing hearing. After a 20-minute drive, Taehyung arrived at the court. He walked with purpose toward the courtroom. Inside, the room was packed. Reporters were poised with cameras and recorders. In the gallery, Taehyung spotted his cousins who had come to show their support. On the other side of the aisle, Yeojin's family was also present. However, among the Yoon family, Taehyung only saw Mrs. Yoon and a few of Yeojin's cousins. Mr. Yoon was nowhere to be found. It seemed the man had indeed chosen to wash his hands of the proceedings. Jungkook. Hung. Taehyung nodded grimly, joining Jungkook, Seokjin, and their other relatives. Taehyung, thank you all for coming. Mr. Jaeon, Jungkook's father, patted Taehyung's shoulder gently. Of course. We're with you all the way, Taehyung ah. Taehyung, thank you, uncle. He replied with a faint smile. Taehyung took his seat in the section reserved for the victim's family. He took a long, deep breath, waiting for the proceedings to begin. Soon after, the judges entered and took their seats at the front of the room. Judge, are all parties present? He asked the court clerk. The clerk bowed slightly. The defendant has not arrived yet, Your Honor. The judge nodded curtly. Order the officers to bring the defendant in. The clerk bowed again and hurried out of the courtroom. 9 minutes passed. The people in the gallery began to exchange confused glances. Whispers filled the room as everyone wondered why the defendant was being delayed. The judge began to look impatient. What is taking so long? He asked sternly. He turned to an officer remaining in the room. Check on the situation. See if there's a delay with the police or what's going on. Yes, Your Honor, the officer replied, rushing out. 7 minutes later, a police officer entered the courtroom. He walked directly to the judge's bench and whispered something. The judge's expression shifted instantly into one of shock. Seeing this, Seokjin leaned toward Jungkook. Something's wrong, Seokjin whispered. Jungkook nodded, his eyes narrowing. Yeah, looks like that crazy woman is causing trouble again. Taehyung, his patience fraying and curiosity piqued, finally spoke up. He stared at the bench with a dark expression. Taehyung, Your Honor, has something happened? The trial has been delayed long enough. Why hasn't the defendant been brought in? The judge remained silent for a moment after hearing the question. He cleared his throat before speaking. My apologies to everyone present, he said with a grave tone, especially to the victim's family. The judge paused to take a breath. This trial cannot proceed. Consequently, the court cannot hand down a verdict. Therefore, the criminal case against the defendant is hereby dismissed by law. The courtroom erupted. Taehyung and his family stared in disbelief. In an instant, the room descended into chaos. Several members of Taehyung's family stood up, loudly protesting the decision. Reporters began frantic whispers while adjusting their cameras to capture the unfolding drama. Meanwhile, the Yoon family looked equally stunned, though they remained in their seats. Mrs. Yoon looked utterly bewildered. They didn't understand why the trial was being closed so abruptly. No one from the Yoon family had attempted to free Yeojin, especially since Mr. Yoon had strictly forbidden any interference. Mr. Jaeon, the trial can't proceed. What are you talking about? How can you just close the case like this? He shouted angrily. Judge, order in the court. Please, remain calm. We have reached this decision because the trial literally cannot continue. By law, a criminal sentence can only be passed upon a living person. That sentence only added to the confusion. People looked at each other in shock while the Yoon family began to show signs of panic. Mrs. Yoon stood up, her face ashen. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling. The judge looked at the gallery before delivering the final blow. The defendant, Yoon Yeojin, has been pronounced dead. The courtroom fell into a haunting, deafening silence. Upon hearing the news, Mr. Yoon's legs gave out. She collapsed on the spot. The rest of the Yoon family panicked, catching her before she hit the floor and rushing her out of the courtroom. Taehyung and his family stood frozen. They were paralyzed by the news, never expecting such an abrupt end to the nightmare. The judge looked back at the remaining attendees, his voice firm. Since the defendant passed away before the sentencing could take place, criminal liability cannot be pursued. Under Korean criminal law, liability is personal. This means a sentence can only be carried out against the perpetrator themselves. Judge, the parents or family members of the perpetrator cannot be punished for crimes they did not commit. They cannot be imprisoned or fined for the defendant's actions, unless they were found to be accomplices or attempted to destroy evidence. The judge glanced at the files before him. Based on the investigation, the Yoon family has been confirmed to have had no part in obstructing justice. Therefore, they cannot be held criminally liable. The silence in the room deepened as the judge continued. Judge, however, the victim's family still retains the right to file a civil lawsuit for damages. In this case, you may sue the defendant's estate. If the family accepts an inheritance from the defendant, a portion of those assets can be used to compensate the victim's family. The judge re-emphasized the legal standing. The family is not obligated to pay from their personal wealth. Compensation can only be drawn from the defendant's inherited assets. Finally, the judge looked directly at Taehyung. Judge, Mr. Kim Taehyung, you have the right to file a civil suit for your losses. Additionally, you may apply for state-funded crime victim compensation, as this case involved a violent felony. Taehyung remained motionless in his seat. His hands were clenched so tightly in his lap that his knuckles were white. He didn't care about the money. He had never wanted a single cent of Yojin's wealth. All he had wanted was to see that woman pay for her crimes, to see her rot behind bars. But the reality was the exact opposite. She was dead, escaping her sentence before the law could even touch her. Seokjin, forgive me, Your Honor, but what was the cause of death? Judge, the police have not yet released an official statement. The defendant's body is currently being transported to the hospital for an autopsy to determine the exact cause of death. Seokjin nodded slowly before turning to Taehyung. Taehyung, what do you want to do? Do you want to file a civil suit immediately, or apply for state compensation? Taehyung, I want to know how that woman died first. I need to be sure she's actually dead, and that this isn't just some elaborate scheme by her family to get her out, he said, his voice cold and flat. Taehyung's family members could only nod in agreement, respecting his decision to seek the truth first.